This is the Future of Information from the program in Science, Technology, and Society at Stanford University. In this lecture, we will look at scholarly communication in the 20th century. With Henry Oldenburg in 1665 having set the stage for a new form of scholarly communication with the establishment of the academic journal, the importance of scientific publications grew in the centuries that followed, as academic knowledge began to transform society's views on nature. During the Enlightenment period and into the 19th century, increasing numbers of periodicals catered to a greater reading public in Europe as well as in the United States. Most learned societies ran periodicals, but there also emerged many independent periodicals, carrying everything from full research papers to snippets of scientific views. Since Oldenburg's first periodical, scholarly societies and independent journals required the services and skills of printers, publishers, and booksellers. Like Oldenburg, for most scholars and many other societies and their publishers, scholarly publishing was routinely seen as unprofitable. The potential market was small and uncertain, and few scholarly publications were expected to cover their costs. These costs were often paid in full or in part by authors, or by a third party such as a patron or a sponsor, enabling the copies to be sold at a subsidized price, or even for free. At various times, the role of the sponsor was assumed by royal or aristocratic patrons, government departments, learned societies, or universities. The late 19th century saw the replacement of the voluntary culture of scholarly societies and periodicals by professional academic communities and the establishment of new universities across the United States and Europe. Higher education in the United States, that was once an elite and exclusive activity, was opened more broadly to the public by the signing of the Morrill Land Grant Act of 1892 by Abraham Lincoln. This helped to further the established notion that higher education was a public good that benefited society overall. It was considered a central and primary force for building an educated population, and considered critical to the maintenance of a democratic system and to the growth of the middle class for economic growth and prosperity. There was, in effect, a social contract that existed between citizens and public universities that supported the public funding for higher education. The expansion of higher education and university research during this era led to a corresponding growth in the number of journals. In the rapidly changing marketplace, learned societies found themselves struggling to keep up in a growing publishing enterprise where speed and efficiency were of the essence. This provided an opportunity for commercial publishing houses who proved to be far more efficient at disseminating scientific journals than scientific societies. Although commercial publishers did not consider scholarly journals to be a lucrative business, they realized that the associated prestige could help raise their profile. Learned societies and university presses alike began to outsource some of the costs of scholarly communication to professional publishers. For universities, it made little economic sense to internalize the costs of editing, printing, and managing peer review for specialist publications that might have a limited audience distributed across many institutions, with no individual university housing more than a minority of readers that would be interested in a particular publication. Rather, it was thought better to outsource those costs to a publisher who could recover the cost of publication through the marketplace. The dramatically transformed political economy of the post-World War II period led to a rapid evolution of universities and research cultures, an evolution that transformed the scholarly publishing industry. In the years immediately following the Second World War, the United States and Europe experienced massive expansions in higher education and research, driven by ideological and financial commitments by their respective governments. As demonstrated here with the signing of the GI Bill by President Roosevelt, the post-war belief was that university science would be the key to military preeminence and economic prosperity. This revolutionized the place of the university in American society and led to massive investments in higher education. For the next 30 years, the growth of higher education in America was sustained by growing public commitments, bolstered by investments made during the space race with the Soviet Union. The influx of funding to the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, and other federal agencies led to the expansion of the scientific enterprise. The growth and participation in higher education required universities to employ more academic staff, entering careers that increasingly demanded significant research outputs. Whereas the term professor was the typical appointment for a young academic in the mid-19th century and could be a position for life, By the mid-20th century, a young academic might be employed as a lecturer, assistant professor, or associate professor before gaining the title of a full professor. Institutional expectations of academic performance were codified, and research prestige became widely recognized as the dominant currency for academic career progression. The growth of research communities in the US, Europe, and other parts of the world led to an internationalization of the research enterprise. The reputation of scholars within a particular field or discipline began to be generated and recognized by a research community that transcended national boundaries. Rising education levels, coupled with government support during the Cold War, meant that the number of active researchers increased. This reinforced the existing trend towards evaluating intellectual merit, primarily through publication, rather than relying on personal interaction and social networks. With increased funding for research, universities were experiencing a knowledge boom, where the production of knowledge far exceeded their capacity to distribute that knowledge. This caused them again to turn increasingly to their commercial publishing partners to support the communication of the growing volume of research. By 1950, it had been estimated that there were around 10,000 journals worldwide, and by 1980, that estimate grew to over 30,000. The relationship between universities and commercial publishers was initially beneficial for all participants. It increased the needed outlets for knowledge distribution, and it also provided commercial publishers with access to a new market. However, new entrants into the academic publishing market adopted commercial strategies that would come to dominate scholarly publishing. Strategies that were subsequently imitated by older commercial firms and would influence the practices of mission-oriented publishers. The most influential and notorious of these publishers was Czech-born British media magnate Robert Maxwell, owner of the academic publishing press Pergamon. Maxwell recognized the relatively untapped economic potential of science journals and started buying up small academic and scholarly presses. These presses found the situation desirable because they were relieved of the costs and administrative burden of publishing their journals and could be left to the real work of undertaking their research and communicating their findings. Furthermore, Maxwell's Pergamon Press sought to publish detailed primary research papers. They set up dozens of new research journals, particularly in many emerging subdisciplines that did not yet have journals of their own. In a matter of 2 years, from 1955 to 1957, the output of Pergamon Press grew from 50 journals and books to more than 100. For a commercial publisher, Maxwell was astute in identifying specialized scholarly journals as being an attractive business venture. He recognized the commercial opportunity of selling to institutions, and that institutions could be charged more per subscription than individual readers. Libraries of major research institutions were obliged via their mission to subscribe to journals that disseminated vital scholarship, whether in the sciences, social sciences, or humanities, giving the publisher a captive market of willing customers. What further made academic journals a favorable commercial prospect was that much of the major steps of the production process, from content production to editing and reviewing for academic journals, was provided for free from the perspective of the journal publisher. Editors are paid by either universities or federal funding agencies and do not expect compensation from publishers, and authors contribute their articles to journals without any expectation of monetary return. For journals, the subscription fees are typically paid well in advance by subscribers even before a product is received, most commonly at the beginning of a subscription year. For publishers, these fees acted as investment capital, giving them liquidity to make investments with low production costs over the course of a year. With reference to the financial position of a scholarly journal publisher, Robert Maxwell once proudly stated in an interview, "I set up a perpetual financing machine through advanced subscriptions as well as the profits on the sales themselves. It is a cash generator twice over." So the older model of academic publishing practiced by learned societies and university presses that prioritized the wide circulation of high-quality scholarship with little or no expectation of making money was beginning to be replaced by a new model in which it was not only possible to break even, but to make substantial profit. For mission-driven publishing organizations, such as scholarly society publishers and university presses, the emergence of a viable commercial model of academic publishing meant that subsidizing the publication of research could become a choice rather than the necessity it had once been. During the 1950s and 1960s, mission-driven publishers focused on the modest goal of trying to break even, but in subsequent decades, income generation was increasingly seen as the goal, especially in journal divisions. These organizations did not abandon their scholarly mission, but instead sought to balance commercial strategies alongside their mission. So Henry Oldenburg's scholarly journal was transformed by the introduction of commerce in the mid-20th century. Now, rather than serving as a direct service to scholarship, academic knowledge had become a commodity, and scholarly publishing a tool for generating income. This income could be put towards society activities for nonprofit publishers, or it could be used by commercial publishers to generate profit and value for their shareholders.